I woke up to silence. Not the usual kind. The kind that sticks to your skin and whispers that something is off. My husband's car wasn't in the driveway. It was 4:37 a.m. He never left this early. Never. I sat up in bed, waiting for a sound. A door. A step. Nothing. The house felt empty. Cold. His side of the bed was untouched. No warmth. No smell of him. My first thought was practical. Maybe the office called. Maybe there was some emergency. But then I saw his briefcase was gone. His favorite jacket too. He left prepared. Planned. Not rushed. I grabbed my phone. No messages. No missed calls. I checked the calendar, nothing scheduled. My chest tightened. My gut told me this wasn't random. I pulled on a robe and walked downstairs. The kitchen lights were off, but his coffee mug was in the sink. Still wet. He had time to make coffee but not to leave a note. Not to send a text. That wasn't him. Or at least, it wasn't the man I thought I knew. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at that mug like it could answer me. 20 years of marriage, and I suddenly realized how little I actually knew about the man I was married to. The sun was barely breaking through the blinds when my phone buzzed. It was my sister, Linda. She was too cheerful, too awake. "Hey, you up? Thought maybe we could grab breakfast." Who calls at 6 in the morning with that kind of energy? I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me wanted to hear her voice. "Yeah," I said flatly. She laughed, that light fake laugh she always used when she was hiding something. "Great. I'll swing by in an hour." I glanced at the driveway again. Still empty. His car gone. My pulse hammered in my neck. "Sure," I said. "See you soon." I hung up and just stood there, frozen. My sister calling at dawn, my husband missing without a trace. I wanted to believe these two things weren't connected. God, I wanted to believe that. But deep down, a sick thought was already blooming inside me. Breakfast with Linda was strange. She came in wearing a bright yellow dress, makeup done, like she had somewhere important to be. She always overdressed for casual things, but this was different. She looked radiant, glowing almost. She hugged me too tight. "You okay? You look pale." "Didn't sleep much," I lied. She made herself at home, pouring coffee, acting like she owned the place. She kept checking her phone, smiling at it when she thought I wasn't looking. "Who's texting you so early?" I asked. She jumped, then covered quickly. "Oh, just a friend. You wouldn't know him." I nodded, but I felt something twist inside. I knew my sister. She wasn't good at hiding things. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes darted. She was lying. The rest of breakfast was small talk. She asked about the kids, about work, about nothing that mattered. I asked her if she'd seen David lately. She nearly choked on her coffee. "David? No, why?" "Just wondering. He left early this morning. Didn't say where he was going." She blinked fast, then forced a laugh. "You know him. Always working." I watched her closely. Her hands shook when she set down her cup. That was the first real crack. The rest of the day dragged like wet cement. I tried calling David. No answer. Sent him a text. No reply. I even called his office. His secretary said he hadn't checked in. By noon, I was pacing. By evening, I was angry. When he finally walked through the door at 9 p.m., he acted normal. Kissed me on the cheek. Asked about dinner. Smiled like nothing had happened. "Where were you?" I asked. He didn't even flinch. "Work meeting. Last minute." No hesitation. Smooth. Too smooth. But I knew. I didn't say a word. I just nodded and served him dinner. But my mind was racing. His shirt was freshly changed. No wrinkles, no smell of sweat or office. His phone never left his pocket. Later, when he showered, I checked his jacket. Empty. No receipts, no notes. Clean. Almost too clean. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Every nerve in my body screamed. Something was wrong. Something was hidden. And then I thought about Linda again. Her glow. Her nervous laugh. The way she jumped when I mentioned David. My stomach turned. I wanted to shove the thought away, bury it. But I couldn't. It was too obvious. Underscore 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 underscore. The following week, the signs multiplied. David worked late 3 nights in a row. Linda canceled dinner with me twice, once saying she was too tired, the other time claiming she had plans with friends. Both times, her excuses were shaky. I decided to test something. On Friday, I told Linda I had to see Mom. I asked if she wanted to join. She stammered, then said she couldn't. Work thing, she claimed. She didn't work Fridays. That same night, David came home past midnight. Shirt untucked, tie missing. He smelled faintly of perfume. Not mine. I asked where he'd been. He said, client dinner. I smiled, nodded, kissed him on the cheek. Pretended I bought it. Inside, my blood boiled. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I borrowed Linda's tablet during a family barbecue. She left it in the kitchen while running outside to check the grill. She never let anyone touch her devices. Ever. I wasn't even looking for anything specific, but the universe handed it to me. Her screen lit up. A message from D. It read, "Last night was amazing. Same time next week?" My hands went cold. My vision blurred. I put the tablet back exactly as I found it. My face didn't move. I walked outside, smiled, laughed with everyone like nothing happened. But inside, I was dying. There it was. The truth. My husband. My sister. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Because rage wasn't enough. Tears weren't enough. I wanted more. I wanted them to suffer. And in that moment, as I sat across from them at the table, watching them laugh, watching them lie to my face, I made a promise to myself. I would destroy them both. They smiled at me across the table like 2 people who hadn't just stabbed me. They passed the salt. They told a joke. They touched hands for a second and pretended nothing happened. I listened to the laughter and felt the world tilt. I didn't break. Not then. I finished my plate. Cleaned the dishes. Put the tablet back where I found it. I walked past them and went into the laundry room to breathe. I pressed my back against the washer and let my shoulders shake. Tears came hot and fast. Anger followed like a shadow. Tears were useless. Anger was too simple. I wanted control. I wanted leverage. I wanted proof that would strip them bare in front of everyone who counted. I wanted to take everything they valued and hand it back to them broken. I slept badly that night, but I slept with a plan forming. The next morning I woke with a cold, clear thought: collect evidence, secure finances, plan the blow. Not drama. Not a scene at the table. A professional, surgical takedown. First step: proof. Real proof. Pictures, messages, hotel receipts, anything that would stand in court and in social rooms. I started small. I borrowed David's laptop under a pretext. I need to check something about the house sale. His fingers hesitated, then he handed it over. He always trusted me. I opened the browser. No logged out accounts. No obvious passwords. But there was a shared cloud drive. Photos. A folder labeled trips. It was private. Until it wasn't. Inside were pictures. Lazy ones at first, coffee cups, partial faces, a spoon and a mug. Then closer shots. A photo of Linda leaning into David in a kitchen that looked strikingly like ours. A selfie, Linda's face full frame, and David's arms slung across her shoulder. I swallowed bile. I copied everything onto a flash drive. I backed it up twice. I labeled the folders with dates. Methodical. Cold. I didn't cry. Not now. Next, I needed a timeline. Dates, nights, absences. A pattern. I printed calendar entries, cross-checked phone records, noted nights David worked late and nights Linda said she was out with friends. Patterns formed like dark constellations. I hired a private investigator. Yes, I did. It felt like a betrayal of private life to involve a stranger, but I needed professional eyes. I needed surveillance that would be admissible in court. The PI was discreet, older, efficient. He asked a few questions and then told me to leave everything to him for a week. I felt relief. I felt power. While the PI watched from a distance, I tightened my public face. I became the picture of domestic normalcy. I cooked his favorite meals. I smiled when he told a joke. I leaned in when he touched my arm. He was arrogant, believing his lies would never be found out. His arrogance was my advantage. Linda was more dangerous. She behaved like a woman who'd already won. She popped in more often. She asked about family matters with that practiced concern. Her voice was syrupy. Her eyes slid to mine and then away. She was careful, but not careful enough. The PI's first week delivered small wins. Photos of David's car outside a motel after midnight. A receipt for a room paid in cash. A blurred image of two figures slipping into the hotel. The evidence wasn't complete, not yet ironclad, but it was real. The PI suggested wire transfers, odd purchases, anything that tied them together financially. I turned my attention to money. If the marriage was a house with one foundation, the finances were the central pillar. I opened a separate consult with our attorney under the guise of a routine checkup on our estate. The lawyer was courteous, used to couples who spread assets and avoided surprises. I asked questions like a careful client, about community property, about business interests, about what happens in a divorce when one spouse is unfaithful and the other can prove wrongdoing. He didn't give me fairy tale answers. He gave me facts. Facts that could become knives if I handled them right. He recommended freezing certain joint accounts if there were sudden withdrawals and suggested careful documentation of assets. He warned about costly, public battles and the damage they do to reputations. He also mentioned that in our state, adultery could influence settlements if it affected the financial picture. My pulse sped. There were more levers than I'd thought. At night I sat with a legal pad and a pen. I wrote down every asset, every account, every small business David had interests in. I wrote down who knew what. I wrote down potential allies, people who could be persuaded to testify about late nights at the office or odd expenditures. I wrote down potential enemies, people who would protect him out of loyalty or fear. I gathered photographs, screenshots, timestamps, receipts, the PI's reports. I kept duplicates hidden in several places. One copy went into the bank locker under my maiden name. Another sat in a safety deposit box. Another was encrypted and sent to a secure cloud I controlled. I was paranoid, and I liked it. Then I played a different game. I watched them. I watched how David and Linda moved when they thought no one was looking. I watched for slips, guilty hands, too long eye contact, little jokes that hinted at shared secrets. I watched their language. I recorded conversations when I could. I used nothing illegal, no hidden cameras inside private spaces, no intercepting of phones. I kept clean edges. I wanted evidence that would stand when thrown under bright light. One evening, the PI called me. He had a recording. 2 voices, hushed, both laughing. The clip was short but incriminating. He knew I was listening because I called him back with my hands trembling. The voice on the tape was unmistakable. David. And Linda's, soft, breathy, certain. We sat in the attorney's office with the door closed. He listened, then leaned back, studying the tape. "This is good," he said. "But we can do better. If we want full leverage, we need to show a pattern of deception that affected marital assets, business decisions made to benefit an outside party, transfers, anything that ties them together beyond the bedroom." I told him to look into David's recent business deals. I asked the PI to follow Linda's bank activity. I asked the PI to look for hotel loyalty programs used under false names, for any purchases that could be tied to secret meetings. I wanted them traced, marked, mapped. Inside, I felt a quiet turning. Where before I had been a woman scorned, now I was a strategist. My emotions were still raw, but they were packaged and wielded. The plan wasn't revenge for the sake of revenge. It was retribution that required precision. And then I did something that surprised even me. I started rehearsing my face. I practiced the casual smile in the mirror. I practiced asking David about his day with the same soft interest I'd always shown. I practiced sounding naive when he bragged about late meetings. I practiced letting Linda hug me and kissing her on the cheek while a camera in my head logged the moment. It felt sick. It felt right. I'd learned something important. They were careless because they thought they were clever. They had no idea they were under a microscope. Confidence had a way of blinding people. Mine sharpened. 2 weeks into the hunt, the PI delivered what I needed. A string of photos, David and Linda arriving at a motel. The same 2 checking into a room under aliases. A receipt showing a large cash withdrawal from David's account the day before. Photos of them leaving together in the morning. The evidence stitched into a narrative. I held the printouts in the darkness of my car outside my mother's house and let the engine cool. The steering wheel burned my palms. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I called my attorney and told him to draw up the first set of documents, a provisional asset freeze, copies of evidence to hold in escrow, and a tentative divorce filing to be ready if needed. The lawyer hesitated. "You know this will make things ugly," he said. "This will destroy reputations. There's a cost." I answered simply. "I know the cost. I know what I'm willing to pay." He nodded and began to work. That night, I packed a small bag. Not for fleeing. For readiness. I gathered papers, irreplaceable items, and copies of what I'd collected. I placed the bag in the trunk where no one would look. I told no one. Not my mother, not my friends. Not even the PI, only my lawyer and him knew the scope. I slept for 3 hours and then rose at dawn. I made coffee. I set a plate at the table and placed an envelope on top, empty, meant to be a prop. I kissed David on the cheek when he left. He didn't know he'd been photographed leaving with Linda at midnight. He didn't know his accounts were under scrutiny. He didn't know his marriage was a case I intended to win. He walked out thinking everything was normal. Thinking his lies were safe. Thinking he'd get away with it. Let him think that. It made the trap tighter. The meeting with the lawyer left a trail of cold clarity. He'd filed nothing yet. He was building the scaffolding. The words he used, freeze, escrow, discovery, sounded clinical, like tools in a surgeon's kit. That was exactly how I wanted it. Surgical. Clean. Irreversible. I didn't sleep that night. I moved like a ghost through the house, collecting and cataloging. Each photograph, each receipt, each timestamp became a nail hammered into a coffin. I labeled everything. I dated it. I backed it up. I made redundancies until the data felt bulletproof. The PI brought more. He'd tracked Linda's car to a suburban rental that matched the motel in the photos. He'd recorded phone calls where David promised to figure it out, and Linda laughed like she owned the future. The recordings were clipped and functional. No theatrics. Just facts. That was the difference between a tantrum and a takedown. I started to loosen their network. I called an old college friend of David's under the pretext of catching up. We talked about football, his job, the kids, little things that lowered his guard. I steered the conversation toward office gossip. He volunteered a name. A partner who'd been murmuring about David's distracted leadership. I filed that away. Then I did something almost childish and perfectly effective. I invited David's closest business associate over for a barbecue. I watched the man watch my husband. I made polite conversation, laughed at his jokes, and slipped in a casual question about the firm's recent client list. He answered with the confidence of a man who didn't expect a sting. I made a note. I fed the attorney details by the minute. Business was where David's pride lived. If I could expose cracks there, if I could show that his choices were clouded by personal entanglement, it would do more damage than a screaming match ever could. Reputation mattered in his world. He had allies who bled for him. Reputation cut them loose. Meanwhile, Linda became careless. She left messages on the coffee table. She shared an email by accident with my mother, an innocuous, "See you Saturday," that, in the context of other things, hinted at scheduling that matched motel stays. The universe kept handing me pieces. I took them. I stitched them together. One afternoon, I followed Linda's routine. She liked the little bakery near the park. I parked across the street and watched. She arrived, stylish, phone tucked into her hand. She ordered a pastry, smiled at the barista like she was sunlit on the inside. Then she sat at an outside table and dialed a number. I watched her mouth move. I watched her laugh. I watched her eyes close for a moment, as if savoring the sound of his voice. I took a photo. Distance gave me safety and clarity. No drama. No scene. Just record and move on. That evening, I slipped the new photos and recordings into the attorney's file. He called back 10 minutes later. "This is tight," he said. "You're building a narrative that will not only be convincing to a judge but to men who thought they could protect him. This isn't just infidelity, this is deception that touches marital assets. It gives you leverage." Leverage. I liked the sound of that word. Leverage meant options. Options meant control. But control came with a price. I had to keep pretending. I had to play the part of the devoted wife, the picture of domestic normalcy. I smiled at family events. I answered calls. I acted like someone who forgave or forgot. I sat through movie nights with him, watching his face for fissures. I let him hold me in a way that felt like poison. During a Friday dinner with friends, David bragged about a new partnership he had secured. He didn't mention a partner's name. He likely thought it irrelevant. I knew better. I excused myself to the bathroom, pulled up the partnership documents the attorney had retrieved through Discovery, and read the lines: client transfers, shell company beneficiaries, transactions routed through a firm with ties that matched addresses Linda had used for online shopping. Patterns appeared. I watched him from the doorway. He laughed easily. He raised his glass. To everyone else, he was a titan. To me, he was a man walking a thin wire over a canyon. It was time to escalate. My lawyer recommended producing a controlled leak. Not a public scandal, yet. A whisper to the right ears. A few select people who could topple him without the drama of headlines. A partner at his firm who would not tolerate being blindsided. A close client who would withdraw if they suspected instability. A bank manager who would reconsider credit when a spouse is implicated in questionable withdrawals. We chose targets carefully. The attorney drafted a dossier, concise, damning, legally sound. It included the motel receipts, the photos, the timestamps, the odd cash transfers. It included a note tying a recent business decision to a wire routed through an account Linda had used. The argument was clear: David's personal entanglement compromised his professional decisions. It was actionable. I sat in the car outside the bank while the attorney spoke with the bank's relationship manager. I watched people pass, their faces ignorant of the small earthquake I was building. The bank put a hold on certain transactions pending review. The client pulled a scheduled investment when a rival whispered a doubt. David's partner texted that he needed to meet. The first cracks appeared, tiny at first, then branching. David noticed. He called that night 10 times. I let it go to voicemail. He sent flowers the next morning. I left them on the counter and pretended not to see them. The next day, Linda stopped coming over. Her texts dried up. She was careful now. She answered work emails with robotic efficiency. The world around them tightened. They suspected a leak. They didn't know where the leak was. That ignorance was delicious. I could have moved fast. Filed. Confronted. Broke them in a scene. But I liked war better when it was staged. I liked seeing the fall happen piece by piece. Watching reputations erode in quiet, humiliating ways felt more righteous than a single burst of righteous anger. Still, I was not immune to the nights of doubt. I'd wake up and stare at the ceiling, thinking about how the life that had once been shared had become a chessboard. I thought about the kids, how to protect them from collateral damage. I thought about my mother, who trusted her children blindly. I thought about what I had to do to keep my dignity intact. So I called one of my son's friends, a young man in his 20s who worked in social media. I asked him, quietly, to preserve certain online posts and create backups of things that might vanish under pressure. He didn't ask why. He did as I asked. He was practical and loyal in a way that surprised me. The pieces kept moving. The bank froze accounts. A client withdrew quietly. Rumors started in the right circles. David's partner confronted him in a boardroom, in private, fingers pointed at facts I had supplied. David spun, blamed stress, said things the partner found insufficient. His defense eroded with each well-placed fact. They began to argue at home. Not loudly, careful steps into a war. I watched from the living room, pretending to read, while their voices rose and fell behind the closed doors of the study. They were careful not to drag me in. That made me smile. Control, again. One night, when the arguing stopped and the house finally grew quiet, I walked into the study where David sat alone, staring at numbers on a screen. He didn't look up. I stood behind him, folded my arms, and said nothing for a long while. He finally said, low and rough, "Are you seeing this?" I nodded. "I am." He closed his laptop slowly and met my eyes. There was fear in him, thin and naked. For the first time since I'd known him, I felt pity. It passed like cold wind. "Why?" he whispered. I smiled. It was small and precise. "You told me once that everything we do leaves a trail," I said. "You were right." He asked me why. I answered with a smile like a scalpel. "Because you left footprints." The panic in his eyes was raw. He tried to gather himself, lawyer talk, plausible deniability, but his sentences kept tripping over facts I'd handed to the right people. He called Linda by her name once, quietly, like it stung. She wasn't home. She'd already begun to disappear from his life in small, deliberate ways. From then on, the rhythm changed. Nobody was surprised when David started sleeping in the study. He said he was working late. He said it with a new edge, an effort to keep his dignity. Linda texted to say she was busy and then sick. The house grew quieter. That silence was different than the first night I noticed him gone. This silence had teeth. But the war was far from over. The attorney wanted leverage to force a settlement without a messy public trial. He pushed for confidential mediation. I agreed, on my terms. I would settle only if the settlement included not just financial compensation but also clauses to protect me from future slander and to ensure David could not benefit from certain business interests. I wanted restrictions, non-compete clauses, buyouts, and clear separation from assets that had been commingled. I wanted what would make their future smaller. David resisted. He enlisted a lawyer, then another. He tried to threaten countersuits, claims of intrusion, claims of harassment. He waved the specter of a bitter public divorce like a sword, hoping I'd blink. I didn't. While lawyers danced, I continued to tighten the noose in ways the courtroom couldn't see. I turned toward the people who mattered to David, the board members, the major clients, the charities that had once been his proud gestures of success. I quietly briefed a few of them, not with gossip but with documentation, receipts, timelines, the PI's notes. I framed it as risk management. If their partner's personal conduct affected their finances, they deserved to know. Word moved faster than I expected. A major client asked for a pause. A donor withdrew support from a gala that David had planned. A trustee quietly recused himself. The ripple effects were surgical, not sensational, exactly the way I wanted them. Controlled, precise, lethal to his influence. Meanwhile, Linda's life unraveled in ways that weren't dramatic but were devastating. My mother refused to speak with her for a week after an accidental comment at Sunday dinner, something about loyalty that landed like an accusation. A cousin who'd always defended Linda suddenly kept his distance. The small slights multiplied, invitations stopped, the casual favors dried up. People she'd taken for granted became obstacles. One afternoon, when the house felt brittle as glass, Linda showed up unannounced. Her mascara had run. Her voice had an edge that came from desperation. She stood in my kitchen, and for the first time since I caught that message on her tablet, she looked like someone who had been caught in a storm and couldn't find shelter. "What do you want?" I asked. I kept my tone level. I had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in my head, what to say, what not to say. She leaned on the counter and said nothing for a long moment. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said finally. "He said it was a mistake. He said he'd fix things." I thought, her voice broke. She swallowed. "I thought I could keep it quiet." "You thought," I said, "that you could take my life and tuck it into a drawer." My voice was calm, but every word held weight. "You thought I wouldn't notice." She looked at me then, really looked, and there was shame there, but also a hardened edge, like someone who'd wagered everything and was now counting losses. "I'm sorry," she said. "It was small. It wasn't enough." I could have exposed her in a way that would leave nothing left, emails to family, a call to her employer, a public leak, but something stopped me. Not mercy. Strategy. She was collateral, not the primary target. David had the money, the influence, the power. He was the one who had to fall far enough that she could not ride the wreckage back to safety. Crushing him meant crushing her support system too. Let natural consequences do the rest. So instead, I made a different choice. I offered Linda two options. She could cooperate, tell the truth in mediation, sign a confidentiality agreement, and accept a small financial settlement that would let her vanish quietly, or I could hand everything I'd gathered to her mother and to people who would not keep secrets. I watched her decide. She chose the quiet option. She signed. She left town weeks later with a suitcase and a promise of silence. I watched her go from the window and felt nothing about it but something like finality. With Linda gone, the battlefield narrowed. David's allies became more vocal. Some offered sympathy, others tilted away. His partner called an emergency meeting and argued that whatever turmoil existed, it was now a liability the firm couldn't ignore. There were votes behind closed doors. Compromises offered. The world David knew shifted. One morning, I received an anonymous envelope at the front door. Inside was a single photograph, David and Linda in a hotel hallway, his hand at the small of her back like a man who didn't care who might see. No note. No signature. It was placed with the same careful cruelty as the evidence I'd been collating for months. I knew the source without asking. It was the economy of revenge, minimal drama, maximum effect. He broke first in the quietest way. A call from his partner came through my phone, one of those calls that was meant for his lawyer, but the line connected anyway. I answered out of habit and then stayed silent while words I'd planted echoed back at me, assurances undone, numbers falling, partners balking. David tried to speak when my name finally left my lips, but it was a sound that no longer carried authority. It carried regret. The mediation began with posture and posturing. He arrived in a suit that tried to say normal. I arrived with documentation and with a face he no longer recognized, steady, precise, and patient. The mediator set the ground rules. The lawyer opened, cool and factual. I let him speak. I let the things I'd prepared unfurl like surgical tools. He tried to argue. He tried to spin. He called my evidence circumstantial and taken out of context. The mediator paused, then reviewed the receipts, the photos, the hotel bookings, a chain that led nowhere but one truth. He leaned forward, eyes flat. "This is a financial risk," he said. "This is a business problem." The settlement we reached was ugly but clean. He bought out certain assets. He relinquished stakes in businesses I argued were at risk of being compromised. He accepted restrictions on future dealings. He agreed to an amount that would sustain me and to clauses that prevented him from trying to undermine my position later. We signed. He left the room anemic, dignity scorched. No courtroom drama. No tabloid circus. Just paperwork and the quiet humiliation of what it means when the foundation of a life is removed. Outside the mediation room, a board member shook my hand with a look that mixed pity and respect. "You handled it well," he said. "Quiet is the only way to keep some things from tearing apart." I nodded. The money in my account was a number now, a number that meant freedom, not victory. It bought a house in my name, an account in my control, and the legal breathing room to step back and choose. But money is an antiseptic, not a cure. The mornings after the settlement were thin. The house felt like a room I had inherited, not a home I'd built. The photographs still existed, the knowledge of what had happened still lodged in my bones. I started small rituals to reclaim the place. I repainted the kitchen, planted lavender, rehung photographs that told a life I wanted to keep, my children's smiles, my father's old fishing hat, a postcard from a trip David and I had taken before everything cracked. One night, alone in the kitchen, I opened a bottle of wine and called my son. We talked like nothing had happened and like everything had happened. He listened. He asked few questions. He wanted stability. I promised him that. But promises are a fragile architecture held together by choices you make every day. I had one. The settlement had been strategic, surgical, and it had hurt them where it mattered. But revenge, I learned, doesn't look like the stories people tell. It doesn't always come with fireworks or vengeance carved on someone's forehead. Sometimes it's quiet. It's legal forms and closed meetings and the slow, embarrassing erosion of a life. Still, something else had shifted in me. I wasn't the woman who woke up to an empty driveway anymore. I was someone who could watch and plan and act without crumbling. That knowledge changed the lines on my face. It changed the way I walked into rooms and the way people glanced at me, a little more wary, a little more respectful. But the story wasn't finished. The settlement had addressed money and business and public standing. It hadn't settled everything that mattered, what was done to trust, to family, to the small private places where love used to live. There were other kinds of reckonings I hadn't yet given myself permission to pursue. That realization came the night I found a letter in my mailbox, written in my husband's handwriting, folded with a tenderness that made my stomach knot. It wasn't an apology. It was a confession of sorts, a list of things he'd done, of things he'd taken, of promises he could no longer keep. He wrote about regrets and about fear. He asked for forgiveness in a way that felt like a test. I held the paper and felt something else stir up, not anger, not triumph, but a long, cold curiosity. What I wanted from him had changed. It wasn't about money or paperwork. It was about a balance sheet of the soul. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into my pocket. Then I walked to the bookshelf, pulled out a thin envelope I'd kept for months, and wrote 3 words on it, for the end. I sealed it and slid it into the back of a drawer. The game was not over. It had simply changed shape. I didn't respond to the letter. Not right away. I let it sit in that drawer, heavy as a loaded gun, while I went about my days with surgical precision. Grocery runs, emails, bills paid on time. On the surface, life looked normal. But beneath it, everything I did was threaded through with calculation. David didn't vanish after the settlement. Men like him never do. He lingered around the edges of my life, calls that I didn't answer, messages that I deleted unread, sightings in places that were too convenient to be coincidences. At the grocery store. Outside the bank. Once, late at night, parked across the street from my house with his headlights off. He wanted me to know he was still there. The law had tied his hands financially, but obsession isn't something you can file away in a courtroom. That's when I realized, the settlement had cut off one head of the snake. But the body was still writhing. So I sharpened my next move. Quiet, invisible, and final. First, I hired a different kind of investigator. Not the one who tracked down hotel receipts. This one specialized in digital footprints. Within a week, I had access to David's private accounts, offshore banking, encrypted emails, even a burner phone number he thought was untraceable. He was sloppy now, desperate. He'd already begun funneling money through false shells, trying to rebuild what I'd stripped away. He was planning something. That was fine. So was I. I leaked pieces of his new operation to the right places. Not the press, too flashy. Regulators. A competitor he'd wronged years ago. An anonymous tip to a compliance officer with a reputation for blood. It was like tossing meat into a tank of sharks. I didn't need to attack directly. I just needed to let them smell the blood. Meanwhile, Linda resurfaced. She sent a message through a cousin, claiming she wanted to talk. She said she was sorry again. She said she was broke. She said David had promised to take care of her, and now he was unraveling. She asked if I could help. I laughed when I read the message. Help. The word felt poisonous in my mouth. Linda had made her choice. She'd burned the bridge and then expected me to build it back for her. I didn't respond. I let silence do the work. Silence is louder than rage when you aim it right. Weeks passed, and the pressure I'd engineered began to show. David lost 2 contracts. His firm's accounts were frozen pending investigation. His partner stopped returning calls. He looked thinner the last time I spotted him, standing outside the coffee shop across from my office, trying to act casual while scanning the street. His arrogance had bled away, replaced by something rawer. Fear. One night, the envelope I'd marked for the end burned a hole in my drawer. I took it out, held it, thought about what I had written inside, the last card I could play. It contained the one piece of evidence I hadn't used yet. The proof that tied David's financial schemes directly to Linda's help. Emails, transactions, dates. Enough to ruin them both completely, legally, and publicly. I hadn't used it because revenge isn't about noise, it's about timing. And timing, I knew, was close. The next morning, I found another envelope in my mailbox. Same handwriting. David again. No letter this time, just a photograph. Me, taken from across the street, in my kitchen window at night. No words. Just a message carved in silence, I can still reach you. I sat at my table with the photo in my hands. My breathing steady. My heart calm. If he wanted a final act, I would give it to him. On my terms. I slid the envelope marked "For the End" into my purse. Because the end was coming. And this time, there would be no mediation, no settlement, no polite signatures on paper. This would be the part of the story where everything broke open. And I was ready. The morning after that photograph appeared in my mailbox, I stopped waiting. I put on dark jeans, tied my hair back, and slipped the envelope labeled "For the End" into my bag. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't even angry anymore. I felt something colder, steadier, like steel sliding into place. I started with the regulators. My contact, a man who rarely spoke more than 3 words at a time, got the entire file on David's offshore funneling and fraudulent transfers. I didn't send it from my email. I used an encrypted drop site, left no trail that could lead back to me. Within hours, I knew the fuse was lit. Next, I walked into David's firm. No warning. No call ahead. Just me and my bag, past the receptionist who tried to stall me with a tight smile. I went straight to his partner's office, shut the door, and dropped a copy of the same file onto his desk. "You'll want to see this before the regulators do," I said. He didn't argue. He didn't even look me in the eye. He just stared at the stack of papers like it was a loaded gun. By the time I walked out, phones were ringing. Staff whispered in corners. I knew what I'd done. I hadn't just wounded David's business. I'd set the wolves inside the walls. That night, Linda showed up at my house. I hadn't invited her. She was thinner, her hair messy, her eyes rimmed with red. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Please," she said the second I opened the door. No greeting, no explanation. Just that one word, broken and raw. I didn't move. I let her stand there on the porch, shaking. She tried again. "He's turning on me. He's saying I was part of it. He showed me the letters, the transfers. He's going to blame me for everything." I almost laughed. Almost. "You were part of it," I said flatly. "You made your choices. Don't come here looking for shelter." Tears welled in her eyes. She reached for my arm. I stepped back. "I'm your sister," she whispered. "No," I said. "Not anymore." And I shut the door in her face. I stood there after the lock clicked, listening. She stayed for a few seconds, then her footsteps retreated down the porch. I didn't look out the window. I didn't need to. I knew she wouldn't come back. The next 48 hours tore through David's life like a hurricane. Investigators froze more accounts. His partner announced his suspension from the firm. Clients pulled out en masse. By Friday, David's name was plastered in headlines, not for success or philanthropy but for fraud, deceit, and scandal. I kept quiet. I didn't speak to reporters. I didn't post on social media. I watched it unfold like a show I had already seen in my mind, frame by frame. Then came the call. David, his voice ragged, demanding to see me. "One last time," he said. "You owe me that much." I didn't owe him anything. But I agreed. Because this was the part of the story I'd been saving for. We met in a diner off the highway, a place so ordinary it made the moment feel unreal. He looked nothing like the man I married. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, his eyes bloodshot. He sat hunched over the table, hands shaking as he clutched his coffee. "You did this," he said, his voice low, hollow. "You destroyed me." "No," I replied. "You destroyed yourself." I just held up a mirror. He slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware rattle. A few people glanced over, but he didn't care. "You think you've won? You think this is over?" I leaned forward, calm, steady. "It's over when I say it's over." I slid the final envelope across the table, the one I'd kept hidden until now. His hand hovered over it, trembling. "What is this?" The end, I said simply. He opened it. Inside were the documents tying Linda directly to his fraudulent accounts. Her name, her access codes, her transfers. Proof that she hadn't just been his mistress, she'd been his accomplice. His face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no words came out. You can go down alone, I said, my voice flat, razor sharp. Or you can drag her with you. Either way, you don't come back from this. He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time, I saw fear. Not anger. Not arrogance. Pure fear. I stood, picked up my bag, and walked away. I didn't look back. That night, the news broke again. Not just about David. About Linda, too. Her name appeared in the filings, tied to his accounts, listed as a participant in the scheme. My phone buzzed non-stop with calls and messages, but I ignored them. I poured myself a drink, sat by the window, and watched the quiet street outside. For the first time in months, I felt the silence again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. This silence belonged to me. And I wasn't done yet. The morning the indictments went public, I woke up before dawn. The air was sharp, the kind that cuts your lungs. I sat at the kitchen table with coffee in my hands and watched the first headlines appear on my phone. David Hale indicted for fraud. Local business icon faces federal charges. Second defendant named, Linda Ryan. I read every word, slowly, like I was savoring a meal I'd spent years preparing. The facts were laid out cleanly: bank transfers, offshore accounts, falsified contracts. The kind of case no defense attorney could untangle. By mid-morning, the phones were ringing off the hook. Reporters. Lawyers. Even old friends I hadn't heard from in years. I ignored them all. I didn't need to speak. The evidence spoke louder than anything I could say. At noon, my attorney called. His voice was tight but satisfied. It's over, he said. They'll both be arraigned next week. The prosecutors have more than enough. You don't need to testify. You're clear. Clear. The word echoed in my head. That evening, I drove past the courthouse. Cameras crowded the steps, reporters shouting questions into microphones, their lights cutting through the dark. David walked out in handcuffs, head down, his suit rumpled and gray. Behind him, Linda followed, thinner than I'd ever seen her, eyes hollow. They didn't look at each other. They didn't look at anyone. I parked half a block away and watched. No one saw me. No one knew I was there. And that was how I wanted it. Revenge isn't loud. It isn't fireworks or blood in the street. It's precise. It's surgical. It's watching two people who thought they could take everything from you stand in the cold, stripped of power, stripped of dignity, with nothing left but each other's betrayal. When I finally drove home, the house felt different. Not haunted anymore. Just mine. I poured myself a drink, sat by the window, and let the silence fill the room. For the first time in months, it was peaceful. I thought about David. About Linda. About the lives they'd tried to build on lies. They would spend years behind bars, clawing at scraps of what they once had. Their names ruined. Their legacy gone. Me? I was free. That's the part no one tells you about revenge. It doesn't fix the past. It doesn't erase the betrayal. But it gives you something else. Control. The power to end a story on your terms. And mine ended here, quiet, complete, and irreversible.